She found a broken billionaire crying alone at midnight. What this black receptionist did next changed everything. Hi, and a warm, heartfelt welcome to Alcott Stories, where emotions breathe, hearts heal, and love finds its way no matter how broken the beginning is. Tonight's story will take you on a journey that begins in silence, but ends in the most unexpected, beautiful love. Imagine this. A billionaire walks into a quiet clinic at midnight, completely shattered, and what a kind-hearted black receptionist does next. It changes everything. Curious? You should, because this is not just a love story. It's a story of pain, healing, and transformation that will stay with you long after the video ends. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to send you a beautiful prayer from my heart. May your heart find the peace it deserves, your soul receive the love it's been waiting for, and may you be reminded tonight that no matter how dark life gets, light always returns, sometimes through a person, sometimes through a story. E.T. Hi. I know so many of you love my stories, and even say you love my voice, and trust me, that means the world to me. But I've noticed that many of my beautiful family members don't stay till the end or forget to press the like button, and that's really hurting the channel. YouTube starts freezing or hiding the content when engagement drops 7 when we pour our hearts into these stories. So if you're one of my loyal viewers, please, stay with me till the end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Every little thing helps this channel grow and lets me continue sharing stories that move your soul. And now, before we begin, I want to know something from you. Where are you watching me from tonight? And what's the time over there? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one and love seeing how far our family stretches across the world. All right, grab a warm drink, dim the lights, and get cozy. Because this story, it might just remind you that even the loneliest night can lead to a brand new dawn. Let's begin. Ethan Caldwell's world sparkled like polished diamonds under the flashing lights of the media. His tailored suits clinging to a body sculpted by discipline, his blue eyes coldly enchanting beneath the polished smile he wore like armor. Every headline called him a genius, a dream, a self-made icon, the man who turned nothing into billions before 35, but none of them ever asked what he lost along the way. They didn't see the way his shoulders slumped when the boardroom emptied, or how often his phone rang without names saved in his contacts. The luxury penthouse in the sky, the sleek cars lined up like ornaments in his private garage, the staff that greeted him with robotic cheer-it, all served as a glittering distraction from the hollowness expanding inside his chest. His home, while opulent, echoed like a tomb when the sun dipped beyond the horizon, each room meticulously decorated by designers who never asked what made him feel safe. By night, Ethan became a stranger to the man on the magazine covers, a ghost drifting between marble floors and massive glass walls that offered a perfect view of a city pulsing with life he no longer felt connected to. He'd stand on his balcony in silence, high above the sleeping world, gripping a glass of untouched whiskey, watching traffic flow like veins through the city's heart, wondering why his own felt so still. The money never stopped, the deals kept rolling in, his company stock soared like rockets, but inside, Ethan was spiraling, suffocating under the weight of appearances. Everyone wanted a piece of him, investors, models, clients, socialites, but none of them ever really saw him. They admired the empire, not the architect. And every night, as the city lights blinked like false stars, Ethan walked barefoot through rooms too big for his soul, haunted by the quiet that followed him like a curse. His reflection mocked him, perfectly dressed, yet painfully lost. He remembered laughing once, years ago, back when his mother's voice still filled his childhood home, and his dreams weren't driven by proving something to a father who never stayed. Now, even the sound of his own name felt foreign, echoing down empty hallways like a call unanswered. Loneliness wasn't just an emotion, it was a presence, a silent companion that sat across the dinner table as he pushed food around a plate untouched. He tried distraction, spontaneous flights to islands, meaningless dates with models whose names he couldn't remember, pouring money into ventures that excited no one but his PR team. Yet the void inside him only grew, feeding on everything he used to silence it. The world saw a man who had it ally at Ethan, often lay awake until dawn, blinking at his ceiling, wondering what it meant to actually feel full. Behind closed doors, he discarded the role of America's most eligible billionaire and sank into silence, replaying regrets like lullabies. He thought of the fiancée he pushed away because love scared him more than failure. He remembered the friends he ghosted because success demanded sacrifice. Every morning, he donned his perfect smile like a weapon, but every night, he cracked beneath the weight of everything he refused to face. His heart, once open and eager, had become a locked vault, too used to being misread, misused, or simply ignored. Ethan's soul was tired, not from work, but from pretending he wasn't hurting. His wealth had built him a kingdom, but left him no one to share the throne with. He longed not for riches, but for one genuine moment. One person who could look past the power and see the pain. One voice that didn't want his money, but his truth. He found himself talking to his late mother's photograph, whispering things he could never tell the world. He visited old neighborhoods in disguise, sitting on park benches where he once dreamed small, trying to feel something real again. But nothing reached him. Not until a night that began like all the others, quiet, hollow, tired, took an unexpected turn. A restless impulse, a drive through dim streets, a need to escape the suffocating silence, led him to a part of town he hadn't seen in years. He didn't know why he stopped outside that small, modest clinic. Maybe it was the light glowing warmly from the inside. Maybe it was fate. But something told him to go in. That was the night everything changed. That was the night Ethan Caldwell, the broken billionaire the world never truly knew, took his first step toward healing, not through fortune or fame, but through a stranger's kindness waiting just beyond the reception desk. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed gently overhead, as Sarah Daniels tucked a loose braid behind her ear and sipped lukewarm coffee from a cracked ceramic mug she'd used every night for the past 2 years. The clinic was still, its sterile white walls warmed only by the faint smell of lavender from the candle she secretly lit behind the desk, a quiet rebellion against the coldness of her routine. Her brown skin glowed softly beneath the dim light, her deep eyes alert despite the hour, scanning paperwork and softly humming an old gospel tune her mother used to sing during hard times. The air outside was thick with rain, and the street outside lay deserted, but inside, Sarah moved with calm precision, filing reports, checking patient logs, and chatting with the night janitor like always. Yet something in the air felt different, like a breath being held before a storm, a ripple of energy she couldn't explain. Her chest tightened not in fear, but in intuition, as though the universe was whispering that something was about to shift. She couldn't name it, but her spirit felt an invisible thread tugging at her thoughts, drawing her eyes constantly toward the door, as if waiting for someone her soul recognized but hadn't yet met. She stood, adjusting the collar of her soft blue scrubs, just as the clinic door creaked open. A gust of cold air swept in, curling around her ankles like a ghost, and in walked a man she didn't recognize but somehow couldn't look away from. His tailored coat was soaked at the shoulders, rain dripping from the edge of his dark hair, his posture strong but somehow fragile, like a statue on the verge of collapse. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The sorrow in his pale blue eyes screamed louder than words ever could. Sarah felt the breath catch in her throat as their eyes met, as warm, curious, unwavering, his hollow, haunted, almost pleading. He stood just inside the entrance, unsure, unfamiliar with the scent of antiseptic and quiet, like a man far from his world. "Can I help you?" she asked softly, her voice the only sound in the silent room. He nodded once but didn't move forward. "Are you hurt?" She tried again, stepping gently around the desk, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the tile. He finally spoke, and his voice, though deep, was barely audible. "Number. I just needed somewhere quiet." Sarah studied him closely, noting how his hands trembled slightly, how his eyes darted like someone unused to vulnerability. She didn't know who he was, didn't realize she was standing in front of Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire whispered about on magazine covers, but she saw something real in him, something broken. "You can sit," she said, motioning toward the corner chairs. "We're open all night." He hesitated before lowering himself into the vinyl seat, his movements slow, as if each one hurt. Sarah returned to her desk, but her gaze flicked toward him more often than her computer screen. She saw how he leaned forward, elbows on knees, fingers laced tightly, jaw clenched, like a man trying to keep from falling apart. She couldn't explain the pull, but she felt it deep in her chest, the ache of recognizing pain in another. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. He looked up, startled, as if kindness was a language he hadn't heard in years. He nodded again. She returned minutes later with a steaming cup, setting it gently in front of him. "Chamomile. For the nerves," she said with a soft smile. His lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. He cradled the cup like it was something precious, holding it close for warmth more than taste. Minutes passed in silence. Sarah pretended to type, but kept watching him in her periphery, noting the way he exhaled deeply, as if the quiet of the clinic was slowly peeling away layers of something heavy. She didn't push, didn't prod. She just let him be, and somehow that space free of expectation became its own kind of comfort. After what felt like an hour, he spoke again. "Do you believe some people are just empty?" His voice cracked slightly, as if the words themselves hurt to say. Sarah looked up, their eyes meeting again. "I believe some people have been carrying so much for so long, they forget how to feel light," she replied softly. He blinked, visibly startled by the depth of her answer. No clichés, no pity, just truth. And in that moment, something fragile, yet undeniable, began to form between them. Not love. Not yet, but the possibility of it. The kind of bond that starts not with sparks, but with silence, understood. Sarah didn't ask why he was there. She didn't need to. His presence alone told a story of quiet desperation. But as the rain tapped against the windows and the tea cooled between his fingers, a strange calm settled in the room. Time seemed to slow. The weight in Ethan's chest, though still there, felt just a little lighter. He wasn't fixed, he wasn't healed, but he wasn't alone, and that, for now, was enough. Sarah glanced at the clock, then back at the man who hadn't yet told her his name. Something told her she'd be seeing him again. She didn't know his story, but her spirit whispered that she would become part of it, not as a savior, but as someone who would witness his unraveling and somehow help him find his way back to himself. The night shift rolled on. Paperwork sat forgotten. The world outside moved on as usual, but inside that humble clinic, two paths had quietly crossed, and neither would ever be the same. The minute hand on the clinic's wall clock nudged past midnight, when the door creaked open again, the same low groan from earlier echoing across the empty room like a memory. Rain clung to Ethan Caldwell's coat as he stepped in again without a word. Again, without a wound, his presence more ghostly than human. Sarah looked up from her half-filled clipboard, unsurprised. She had felt him long before he appeared, as if some invisible tether had already tied them together by something deeper than reason. His hair was damp and disheveled, his collar slightly turned, and the look in his eyes hadn't changed, still hollow, still lost, but now tinted with the faintest shade of trust. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. His silent arrival said more than any appointment ever could. She stood, this time without hesitation, meeting him at the desk with the same calm warmth that hadn't wavered. "I was wondering if you'd come back," she said softly, her voice like velvet against the hum of the overhead lights. Ethan's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like a surrender. He didn't bother with excuses or explanations. He simply murmured, "I didn't know where else to go." Sarah nodded as if she'd heard those words 100 times before, though something in her heart tightened, knowing this was different. She poured another cup of chamomile tea, this time placing it on the coffee table without ceremony, as if to say, "You belong here, if only for a while." Ethan peeled off his coat and draped it over the back of the waiting room chair, settling in with the kind of tiredness that no rest could cure. His movements were slower tonight, like the world had grown heavier in just a few hours. He looked around the small clinic, the aging magazines, the flickering exit sign, the buzzing vending machine in the corner, and for the first time, it didn't feel foreign. It felt safe, or at least safer than the emptiness he left behind. "Rough night?" Sarah asked, her tone gentle, never invasive. Ethan chuckled softly, a sound that sounded surprised to be escaping him. "Rough year," he replied. He leaned back in the chair, tea warming his hands, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths that didn't come easy before. Sarah returned to her seat behind the desk, but turned it slightly to face him, her posture relaxed but present. She didn't pepper him with questions or comments. She simply sat with him, offering presence over pity. For Ethan, that small act just being meant more than 1,000 rehearsed sympathies. He studied her face, the calm in her expression, the way her eyes never flinched at the weight he carried. Most people either recoiled from his sadness or tried to fix it. But Sarah, she accepted it, like a natural part of the human experience. "You always work nights?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence with curiosity. She nodded. "For a while now. I like the quiet. People are more honest when the world is asleep." Ethan absorbed that, letting it sink into the cracks of his weary mind. He wasn't used to honesty, not from others, and certainly not from himself. He stared into his cup, watching the steam swirl upward, carrying pieces of his numbness with it. "What made you stay?" Sarah asked, her tone more curious than prying. "Tonight, I mean." Ethan looked up slowly, eyes locking with hers. "You didn't treat me like I was broken," he said, his voice hoarse with unshed pain. "You didn't flinch." She let those words settle between them like a secret only they could understand. Outside, the rain intensified, tapping rhythmically against the windows. But inside, the stillness between them grew warmer, richer, fuller. Ethan took another sip of tea. He didn't speak of board meetings, of mergers, of headlines screaming his name. He spoke of silence, of childhood fears, of dreams that died quietly. And Sarah listened, truly listened, her heart absorbing each word like sunlight soaking into the soil. The clock kept ticking, but time lost its grip. Neither of them noticed how minutes became hours. Sarah shared stories of her siblings, of growing up in a neighborhood that taught her how to be strong without losing her softness. Ethan, in turn, spoke of a mother who once sang him to sleep, of how her loss left a room in his soul that no success could fill. There were long pauses between their words, but not the awkward kind, the meaningful kind. The kind that says, "I'm still here, I'm not going anywhere." As 2 a.m. approached, Sarah rose and retrieved a blanket from the staff closet, handing it to him without asking. "You can rest a while, if you'd like." He hesitated, staring at the simple offering, as though no one had ever thought to comfort him without a price. Then he took it, draped it over his lap, and leaned back, eyes fluttering closed not in exhaustion, but in peace. Sarah turned the lights down slightly, casting the clinic in a warm glow. She returned to her chair, watching him quietly, marveling at the strange gentleness of this moment. How two strangers could find solace in a space built for emergencies. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell let go of the pressure to be someone. He was simply a man, and she, a woman who had no idea what tomorrow would bring, simply stayed beside him. The night shift rolled on, but everything had changed. The faint buzz of the ceiling light hummed like a lullaby above them, mingling with the soft breaths that rose and fell from Ethan's chest as he sat in the dim corner of the clinic, blanket over his lap, fingers still curled loosely around an empty teacup. Sarah remained in her chair across the room, her clipboard forgotten, her eyes gently watching the quiet miracle of stillness unfolding in a man the world had declared untouchable. It wasn't the hush of sleep, but the silence that came when two broken timelines paused long enough to breathe in the same moment. When Ethan finally opened his eyes again, his gaze didn't hold the same desperation. It was tired, yes, but softer, like the weight had shifted just enough for him to sit upright without collapsing under it. Sarah didn't speak. She simply looked at him with the kind of patience only those who've been through storms themselves can offer, her presence saying more than any word could. For a moment, Ethan studied her like he was trying to figure out why this stranger's presence felt safer than the entire world he'd built. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked. Not with pride, but with something that sounded almost like hope. Sarah tilted her head, the corner of her mouth curling into a calm half-smile. "No," she replied, "and I think that's why you're still here." That truth settled between them like a soft exhale. He blinked slowly, then looked away, as if ashamed of what might come next. But when he spoke again, the words surprised even him. "My father left when I was 11, he said, voice low and brittle. "He told me he'd be back after a meeting. I waited at the window for hours. He never returned." Sarah didn't flinch. She just listened, her eyes locked to his, her silence a shelter instead of a void. "He started another family across the country," Ethan continued, his fingers twitching slightly as if the memory still stung. "Didn't tell us, didn't write. He vanished, like we never existed." His voice cracked on that last word, and Sarah's throat tightened, but still she said nothing. This wasn't a conversation, it was an unraveling, one thread at a time. "I thought I could become successful enough that he'd come back," Ethan admitted, his eyes glistening. "I wanted to prove I was worth staying for. Every company I built, every dollar I made it, was all a scream he never heard." He paused, breathing unevenly, before continuing. "Then I got engaged. Her name was Eliza. She was beautiful, polished, knew all the right people, said all the right things." His mouth twisted with irony. "And loved everything about me, except the parts that were real." Sarah finally shifted, not to interrupt, but to bring the chair a little closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. Ethan didn't stop her. He just kept going, his voice losing its restraint. "We were weeks away from the wedding, when I found out she was seeing someone else, someone I'd mentored, someone I trusted." His jaw tightened. "She told me I was too distant, too cold. That loving me felt like loving a statue." He laughed, once hollow and bitter. "She wanted the empire, not the emperor." Sarah's heart ached, but she didn't let emotion cloud her calm. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Ethan glanced down at his hands, almost ashamed to meet her gaze. "After that, I stopped letting people in. It was easier to pretend I didn't need anyone, that I was better alone." He swallowed hard, his shoulders tense. "But the silence, it's not just quiet. It screams. Every night. Screams with things I never said, with love I never gave, with people I never fought for." The confession wasn't rushed. It came in wave-shavy, honest, raw, and Sarah received everyone like sacred offerings. She leaned her elbows on her knees, her voice gentle but steady. "You're not made of stone, Ethan. You just got tired of bleeding in front of people who didn't care." He looked at her, stunned for a moment by how precisely she'd cut through his emotional fog. There was no pity in her eyes, only recognition, and somehow that made it easier to keep going. "I didn't come here to talk," he said. I don't know. Something about this place, about you. It's like I finally sat down in my own story after trying to write everyone else's." Sarah nodded slowly. "Maybe that's because for once someone's not asking you to be anything but human." The air between them warmed, not with flirtation, but with something deeper: understanding, acceptance, the quiet spark of souls brushing edges for the first time. Ethan's eyes, now glistening, found hers again. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you stay so open in a world that keeps trying to close people off?" Sarah smiled faintly, a sadness in her answer. "I guess I've seen enough pain to know it's not always loud. And when it's quiet, it needs someone willing to sit with it." Her words didn't fix him, but they held him. And in that small, sacred space, just a man and a woman in a clinic long past closing time, Ethan realized he wasn't telling his story to a stranger. He was sharing it with someone whose silence was more healing than 1,000 apologies. The night wore on, but neither moved. It wasn't about fixing what was broken, it was about letting it be seen. And in Sarah's steady presence, Ethan began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't too far gone to be found. The first light of dawn crept through the clinic blinds, painting soft golden streaks across the floor as Ethan slowly rose from the chair, the blanket sliding off his lap like a goodbye he wasn't ready to say. His eyes met Sarah's one last time before he turned to Lavino, dramatic farewell, just a soft "thank you," spoken like a prayer rather than a word. She gave a gentle nod, her heart oddly quiet, yet aware something significant had passed between them, like a chapter starting before either of them realized it had begun. The door closed behind him, but the space he'd occupied felt fuller, as if part of him had stayed behind, stitched into the fabric of that quiet clinic. Sarah sat in stillness for several minutes, staring at the empty seat, feeling the air vibrate with the gravity of what hadn't been said. And though the world outside was waking, within her something had only just begun to stir. That day moved in slow motion. Her routine continued. Patients came and went, charts were filed, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him, to the way his eyes had softened by the end of the night, to the honesty that spilled out like water breaking a dam. She didn't expect to see him again, but she hoped, and hope for her was a rare and sacred thing. The following night, just as she returned from restocking the supply cabinet, the door opened again. This time, he didn't hesitate. He walked in with less weight in his step, but the same searching look in his eyes, as if confirming that she was real and that this place still held space for him. Sarah greeted him with a quiet smile. No questions, no expectations, just presence. He sat in the same chair as before, hands tucked into his coat pockets, and for a few moments they simply existed in silence, letting the familiarity settle like a warm blanket around them. He spoke first, this Timino, about pain, but about memory. A piano piece his mother used to play. The smell of rain on pavement outside her garden. Sarah listened with the same steady grace, her expressions small but sincere, her warmth unwavering. And so began a rhythm neither of them had planned. Every night, just before midnight, he returned. And every night, Sarah was there, not as a nurse, not as a fan, but as herself. Their conversations began like hesitant footsteps on a frozen lake, cautious and slow. He told her about his travels, not the glamorous parts, but the lonely hotel rooms, the brief human connections that never lasted past the checkout time. She shared stories from the clinic, the old man who brought flowers to the nurses every Friday, the kid who called her his night angel after she sat with him through a fever. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other nights they said very little, letting the silence speak in ways words never could. One night, he asked if she believed in soul recognition, the idea that some people meet and just know. Sarah looked at him for a long moment before answering, "I think sometimes souls get lonely, and when they see a mirror, they lean in closer." He nodded, almost like that made sense in a way logic never could. Slowly, their connection grew rootslant but deep. It wasn't flirtation or fantasy. It was honest, cautious closeness, shaped by mutual wounds and the unexpected comfort of simply being seen. Ethan began arriving earlier, sometimes bringing pastries from a bakery he'd discovered down the street. Sarah started keeping an extra mug ready, a little chipped on the rim but somehow perfect for him. She learned how he liked his Titwo sugars, no lemon. He learned how she tucked her braid behind her ear when she was thinking hard. She noticed how he ran his thumb along the rim of the teacup when something troubled him. He noticed how her voice softened when she spoke about her dreams. The world outside moved forward at its usual chaotic pace. But in that small, aging clinic, two lives gently aligned without needing to rush. Some nights, Ethan shared pieces of his past, the journals he burned, the birthday he spent alone in a luxury hotel, the time he bought a penthouse just to feel something and ended up watching snow fall in silence. Sarah never judged. She just leaned closer, letting his confessions echo into the safety of her presence. In return, she spoke about her fear show. She sometimes wondered if kindness still mattered in a world so busy chasing profit. Ethan told her it did. He said she proved it did. And though she didn't show it, his words touched a part of her no one had reached in years. They never touched, not even once. but their eyes held hands every night, and in those unspoken exchanges something grew. Not love yet, but the soft foundation of it. The kind that doesn't burst, it unfolds. On the fifth night, after a particularly heavy silence, Ethan looked up and asked, "Do you ever feel like we were meant to meet?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she smiled, that quiet, knowing smile he'd come to find solace in. Maybe the night shift is where souls finally speak loud enough to be heard. He didn't respond with words. He just exhaled a slow, steady breath that released something he'd been holding far too long. That night, when he left, he paused at the door longer than usual. Sarah watched him with the same calm she always did. But this time, something lingered in the ira, question left hanging, a truth waiting to bloom. He turned slightly, meeting her eyes one more time. "See you tomorrow?" he asked, almost like he needed her answer to breathe. She nodded. "I'll be here." The door clicked shut softly, but the moment hung between them, suspended in time. Neither of them knew what this was, not yet. But they both knew it was real. And real, in a world full of masks and noise, was the rarest gift of all, the quiet promise in Ethan's voice. "See you tomorrow?" Still lingered in Sarah's ears as she sat behind the reception desk the next night, her heart tuned to the soft jingle of the clinic door. The clock ticked past midnight, past 1, past 2, but the door remained still, untouched. Her tea sat untouched too, growing cold with waiting. At first, she told herself he was busy. Maybe something came up. Maybe he needed rest. But the next night passed the same way. And the one after that. And the silence that once comforted her now grew claws, scratching at her heart with the realization that he wasn't just late, he was gone. No text, no message, no Ethan. Sarah didn't have his number, didn't even know his last name yet, but her soul had memorized the weight of his presence, the sound of his laughter barely forming, the breath he took before speaking truths he'd buried too deep. It wasn't just absence, it was loss. Something precious had stepped into her life, lit a small fire in the coldest part of her, and now vanished like it was never real. But it had been. She knew it had. And as she sat in the empty clinic, staring at the seat he'd claimed, night after night, her chest ached in places she didn't know could hurt. The ache deepened when she finally saw the headline, bold, brutal, and splashed across a glossy magazine on the waiting room table. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell's secret affairs and crumbling empire exposed. Sarah froze. The name hit her like a slap. She hadn't even known his full name until that moment, and now it screamed back at her from a tabloid filled with venom. The article oozed with lies claims of manipulation, backdoor dealings, broken trusts, and even cruel betrayals from women who'd never sat across from the man she knew. Every word twisted the truth like a knife, painting Ethan as a cold-hearted monster who used charm like currency and discarded people like old contracts. But Sarah didn't believe it, not for a second. Not after the nights he sat trembling in that chair. Not after the way his voice cracked when speaking of his mother. Not after the way he sipped her chamomile tea like it held salvation. Still, the damage had been done. The media dragged him through the dirt, vultures circling for scraps, desperate to devour what remained of his dignity. She could only imagine what it had done to him. Maybe he'd run, maybe he'd gone underground, or maybe the old wounds the world couldn't see, the father who vanished, the fiancé who betrayed him, the silence that once screamed had opened too wide for even her voice to reach. Sarah's heart burned with helplessness. She paced the clinic during breaks, unable to sit still, hoping for a miracle disguised as a familiar shadow crossing the doorway. Every stranger who entered made her heart race, only to leave her disappointed, a little more broken each time. It wasn't just his presence she missed, it was his soul, his quiet glances, the way he listened without judgment, the stillness he brought that made even her tired nights feel whole, the way he looked at her like she wasn't just kind, but vital, needed, seen. She tried to push it down, bury it beneath the routine of forms and late-night coughs, but every corner of the clinic whispered him back to her. The chipped mug he once used, the seat that held his weight, The faint trace of the cologne that still lingered on the old blanket. Everything felt like a memory refusing to fade. She found herself talking to him in her head, answering imaginary questions he never got to ask, wondering if he thought of her too, or if the world had pulled him back into its ruthless current. Some nights she cried alone in the break room, her hands clenched, her breath shallow, grieving something that never got the chance to bloom. She wasn't foolish. She knew what they had, wasn't labeled, wasn't defined, but it was real. It had depth, meaning. She'd seen the light returning to his eyes, and she'd felt her own heart soften in his presence. She wasn't in love, at least not yet, but she had been changed, touched, forever marked by the way he'd made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible. And she couldn't believe that after all of that, he would disappear without a reason. Her faith in him remained, stubborn and steady, even when everything else said to let go. Days passed, then a week. The clinic rolled on, patients came in, lights buzzed, clocks ticked, but something sacred was missing. Sarah moved through each shift with a quiet shadow over her, her smiles thinner, her laughter rare. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she held on to hope like a secret flame, believing that Ethan hadn't vanished forever, that maybe he was just lost again, hurting, hiding from a world too cruel to let him breathe. And maybe, just maybe, he needed her voice in the silence, her presence in the night, her soul calling his back from wherever he'd run. Because love doesn't always come dressed in grand declarations. Sometimes it arrives softly, one teacup at a time, one breath, one touch, one night. And though the seat beside her remained empty, Sarah Daniels waited not with desperation, but with devotion. Because some connections don't end when one person disappears. They linger, they echo, they pull two hearts back toward each other when the world has tried to tear them apart. And she believed truly, deeply, that if he'd found safety once in her voice, he would find his way back to it again. The days without him stretched like a slow, aching wound, and while the world kept turning, Sarah Daniels couldn't, not without knowing, not without trying. The ache of his absence had carved too deeply into her chest, and though she'd told herself he'd come back when ready, something inside her whispered, otherwise he was lost again, maybe deeper this time. And she couldn't ignore that pull any longer. So one night, after her shift ended and the morning sun barely touched the sky, she took a breath and did something bold. She walked to the coffee shop near the clinic, where Ethan once mentioned buying pastries, hoping someone might know more than the tabloids. Hours passed, names were dropped, and faces blurred until finally, a sharply dressed young man with careful eyes and an unmistakable protective air leaned across the counter and said, "You're the girl from the clinic, right? The one Mr. Caldwell kept visiting?" Sarah's heart stuttered, both from hope and fear. "Yes," she whispered. "Do you know where he is?" The man hesitated, clearly weighing his loyalty, but something in Sarah's voice, honest, aching, real, must have broken through. "He's off-grid," he finally admitted. "Old property out near Ridgemont County. No phone, no press, just quiet. But he's not doing well." That was all she needed. Hours later, with nothing but a backpack, a heart full of worry, and the directions scribbled on a napkin, Sarah found herself on a lonely road framed by leafless trees and cloudy skies. The countryside property sat at the end of a gravel path, guarded only by rusted gates and silence. It wasn't what she expected. No luxury, no staff, just a weather-beaten cottage tucked between overgrown hedges and wild grass. She stepped out of the cab, her boots crunching against the dirt, the wind cold against her cheeks, and for a moment she wondered if he'd even want to see her. But she hadn't come for permission, she came for him. She came because some souls don't give up on others, even when the world does. Her knock echoed against the door, unanswered. She tried again, firmer. Still nothing. So she waited. Minutes passed. Then, just as she began to doubt footsteps, slow, heavy, familiar, the door creaked open, and there he stood, Ethan Caldwell, unshaven, hollow-eyed, wearing the same hoodie he must have slept in for days. His mouth parted slightly in disbelief. "Sarah?" he said, like he wasn't sure if she was real. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "I couldn't let you disappear." For a long moment, he said nothing. The shame in his eyes screamed louder than any words. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, stepping back as if trying to protect her from the mess he believed he was. But Sarah stepped forward, crossing the threshold, not with force, but with presence. "I didn't come to fix you," she said softly. "I came to sit with you, that's all." The walls around him cracked, just a little. He turned away, running a trembling hand through his hair. "You don't know what they said about me," he whispered. "You don't know what I've done, what people think I am." She moved closer, her voice steady. "I know who you were in that clinic. I know the man who told me about his mother's lullabies and childhood ghosts. I know the man who listened like it mattered. That's the only man I see." He lowered himself onto the worn couch, his movements slow, almost defeated. "I feel like everything I touch turns to ash," he muttered. "So I ran. Again." Sarah didn't scold him. She didn't speak of courage or responsibility. She just sat beside him, not touching, just close enough for warmth to pass between them. "You're allowed to break," she said. "But don't stay broken. Not when there's still light in you." Ethan turned to her then, eyes filled with unshed tears and disbelief. "How can you believe in me?" he asked. "After everything?" Her voice didn't waver. "Because I see you. Not your mistakes, not the headlines, just you, and you're worth finding." Silence held them for a beat too long, the kind that feels like truth wrapping itself around skin. Slowly his shoulders dropped, and the tension in his jaw eased. He looked at her as if he was seeing the stars for the first time in years. "You came all this way," he whispered. "I didn't think anyone would." Sarah leaned back against the couch, letting her gaze drift across the room-dusty shelves, half-burnt candles, an untouched guitar in the corner. "Sometimes people just need someone who refuses to leave," she said. And in that moment, something shifted in him. Not fully healed, not yet whole, but touched by her presence in a way no therapy, no luxury, no apology could ever reach. He stood slowly, walked to the tiny kitchen, and returned with 2 mismatched mugs of tea. "Still no lemon," he said, and finally her smile broke. Small, quiet, but radiant. They sat for hours, not needing to say much, because presence spoke louder than promises. She told him about the nights she waited. He told her about the darkness that tried to swallow him. And between those words, something delicate began to mend. Not fixed, not perfect, but healing. When night came and Sarah reached for her bag, Ethan caught her hand, not tightly, but gently, like he needed her to know he didn't want the silence back. "Stay a little longer," he asked. She nodded. "As long as you need." And in that old countryside cottage, hidden from the noise of the world, a billionaire rediscovered something he'd long forgotten, not his wealth, not his power, but the simple, soul-saving miracle of being seen and loved anyway. The stars shimmered like soft sparks of memory as Sarah and Ethan sat side by side on the old wooden bench behind the countryside cottage, their knees nearly touching, their mugs cooling in their hands, hearts finally unguarded in the peace of night. The world had fallen away, no noise, no headlines, no demands, just open sky, and 2 souls brave enough to share silence. Ethan tilted his head back first, exhaling slowly, watching the constellations above, like a man searching for pieces of himself, scattered across galaxies. "I used to love the stars," he murmured, voice almost too low for her to hear. "When I was a kid, my mom and I would lie in our backyard and name the ones we thought looked lonely. She said they were like people, some shined brighter than others, some flickered, some were fading, but all of them still mattered." Sarah listened, eyes tracing the lines of his face in the dim glow of starlight. "She sounds like someone who saw everything deeply," she whispered. Ethan nodded, a small, sad smile curling at the edge of his lips. "She was the only person who ever looked at me like I was more than potential, more than profit. She saw me, just me." A pause, then a crack in his voice. "She died when I was 17. Cancer, fast. It gutted us. One day she was humming in the kitchen. The next, she couldn't lift a spoon. Sarah's breath caught as she turned toward him, every part of her aching for the boy. He used to be the one who carried grief like an untold story. "Were you with her?" she asked softly. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. "I was giving a speech at a school function, winning another award. She told me to go, said she was proud. I left, and she never woke up again." His hands trembled slightly in his lap. "I've built everything since then trying to earn a goodbye I never got." The weight of his words settled between them like a soft ache, and Sarah reached out not to hold him, but to rest her fingers just near his, enough for him to feel anchored. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself to keep her memory alive," she said, her voice steady with emotion. "Love doesn't disappear just because it ends in silence." Ethan turned to her slowly, his eyes rimmed with tears that never quite fell. "I thought if I became someone important, if I made enough money, saved enough people, she'd see me from wherever she was and know I was worth it. But now, I don't even know who I am when I'm not performing." Sarah inhaled deeply, the stars catching in her eyes. "I know that feeling," she said. "Not the exact kind, but that ache of feeling invisible, of wondering if your worth only exists in the eyes of others." Ethan looked at her with gentle curiosity. "Tell me," he said. "I want to know your shadows, too." And so, with the stars listening above and the wind softly brushing the trees, Sarah let her story unfold, not as a victim, not for sympathy, but as truth. "I grew up in rooms where my skin always entered before my voice," she began. "Teachers who praised me but never remembered my name. Storekeepers who watched me closer than they listened. People who smiled too wide but never really saw me. I learned early how to shrink myself to make others comfortable." Her tone didn't carry bitterness, just honesty. "Sometimes I'd stare in the mirror and wonder if my kindness would ever be louder than their assumptions, if I'd ever be seen for my soul before my skin." Ethan's face twisted with sorrow, not pity, but respect. "I see you," he whispered. "I see all of you." Sarah smiled gently, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "And you've spent your whole life building castles around yourself, hoping someone would see the boy inside them, crying for his mother." The truth struck him deep, but it didn't hurt, it freed him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his voice low but steady. "With you, I don't feel like I'm pretending. I don't feel like I have to apologize for feeling lost." She nodded. "Because we're all a little lost. The miracle is finding someone who doesn't try to fix you, but sits beside you while you figure it out." Silence returned, not empty, but sacred, wrapping around them like a blanket. They looked up at the sky again, watching the stars wink through the darkness, and something unspoken passed between them and understanding, a tether, a promise of something forming without being forced. Ethan glanced sideways, voice barely audible. "I've never told anyone the things I've told you." Sarah turned her face toward his. "And I've never felt seen the way I do when I'm with you." No kiss followed, no dramatic gesture, just two people under the stars, connecting beyond flesh, beyond fear, beyond ego, the kind of connection that lives in the space between heartbeats. Soul deep. A silence fell again, but this one held no sadness, only peace. Only the quiet recognition that somewhere along the way, something more than healing had begun a bond, not built on need, but on truth. They sat together until the stars began to fade into the first blush of morning, hearts no longer strangers, but echoes of something beautifully rare. The horizon had barely brightened when Ethan looked at Sarah through sleep-heavy eyes. The stars now gone, but their echo still lingering in the air between them. Something had shifted, subtle but undeniable, as if the rawness of the night before had planted a seed neither of them could ignore anymore. Ethan stood slowly, brushing dew from his jacket, and when he turned to her, his expression held more than warmth, it held intent. "Sarah," he said, voice low but filled with something steady, "I've been thinking about something for a long time now, and last night, it made things clear." She tilted her head, listening, her fingers loosely curled around her now empty mug. "What is it?" she asked. He took a breath, the kind that feels like a leap, and then spoke. "I want to build something real, something that matters. A wellness foundation, mental health, grief support, emotional care, everything I never had growing up. A space for people who feel like they're drowning in silence, the way I used to, the way I still do, some days. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't back away from it. And I don't just want experts with degrees and titles. I want people who understand. People like you. Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching slightly. Me? He nodded. I want you to come work with me. Not as a receptionist, not as background support, but as a lead personal consultant. Help shape it. Guide the voice. Be the heart of it. The offer landed like thunder in her chest, unexpected and impossible to ignore. She opened her mouth, but no words came right away. Ethan noticed her hesitation and added gently, "This isn't about money or favors. You changed my life, Sarah. You reminded me how to feel again. I believe you could do that for others too." Still, she hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the bench as 1,000 thoughts rushed in. His world was a place of glass towers and silent judgment, of high expectations and fragile masks. Did she belong in that space? Would she lose herself trying to hold him up in front of people who only saw titles and tax brackets? She had built a life rooted in quiet purpose, far from the spotlight, and now, this man, this broken billionaire with a healing soul, was offering her a seat at his table. "Ethan," she began, her voice careful, "you know your world is different from mine. It moves faster, it demands more. I'm not sure I'm made for that." He took a step closer, not to overwhelm her, but to remind her he wasn't asking her to change, only to come with him. "You're not made for their world," he said softly. "But I'm not building their world. I want to build ours. A new one. Something rooted in the truth we found in a tiny clinic at midnight." Her throat tightened at his words, and for a moment she turned away, eyes scanning the fields, the trees, the endless horizon, as if hoping the wind might decide for her. But it didn't. The decision was hers alone. And when she turned back to him, there was still fear in her eyes, but behind it, something braver. "I won't do it for the paycheck," she said. "And I won't pretend to be someone I'm not." "Good," Ethan replied instantly. "That's exactly why I need you." The sincerity in his voice quieted the storm inside her. She searched his face, looking for any trace of manipulation, but there was none. Only honesty. Only the man who had sat beside her night after night, stripped of power and armor, held together by hope and tea. Slowly, she nodded. "Then I'll do it. Not for you, not for your name, but for the people who sit alone at 2 a.m., thinking they're too broken to be heard." Relief washed over Ethan's face, not as triumph, but as something deeper gratitude. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded packet, preliminary notes, sketches, a vision not yet formed. "You don't have to say yes to everything," he said, handing it to her. "But I want you to shape this with me. Let this foundation have your voice, not just your hands." Sarah took it slowly, heart pounding as she glanced at the pages. They weren't just numbers or boardroom jargon. They were stories, real ones. Survivor interviews, ideas for safe spaces, late-night hotline plans, and retreat centers for emotional healing. This wasn't a vanity project, it was a resurrection. His own, maybe. Hers, too. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Let's build something beautiful out of all this broken." He smiled, the rare one, soft and full of light. "With you by my side, I know it can be." The sun broke over the trees as if to bless their decision, painting golden light across the porch where they stood. No longer strangers, no longer separate stories, but a beginning neither of them had dared to hope for just weeks ago. It wasn't about fame or healing the world overnight. It was about doing something real. Together. The morning after their agreement, the air felt lighter between Ethan and Sarah, as if hope itself had unfolded between them, like sunbeams across freshly printed dreams. They spent days sketching out the foundation's framework, and nights talking over tea, laughing at old stories, and occasionally falling into silences that said more than words ever could. But the moment they stepped back into the city, into Ethan's world of glass towers and relentless scrutiny, the winds began to shift. It started subtly sideways glances from polished assistants, lukewarm smiles from board members who suddenly forgot Sarah's name, a PR manager suggesting she keep a low profile for optics. Then came the comments. Slippery, coded, daggered with niceties. She's unconventional. Maybe not the best image for the foundation launch. Are you sure she understands how these things work? Sarah heard them whispered in passing, felt them slide like oil through polished hallways where her kindness was mistaken for ignorance and her beauty muted beneath assumptions. At first, she brushed them off, pouring her focus into the Mission the Hotline proposal, the outreach centers, the grief recovery retreats, but the walls began closing in, slow and steady, built of years of judgment she'd fought to rise above. The stairs became longer. The introductions at events grew more hesitant. People questioned how a billionaire with Ethan's lineage, power, and looks had chosen a brown-skinned woman with no pedigree, no Ivy League background, no right connections. And Ethan, though visibly protective, seemed caught between two worlds-fighting old loyalties, long-standing investors, and a society that praised his progressiveness until it dared to look like real love. One evening, as they returned from a meeting that had felt more like a silent trial, Sarah leaned against the elevator wall, eyes downcast. Ethan reached for her hand, but she gently pulled away, not coldly, but with a hurt she didn't know how to speak. "Do you hear them?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you see how they look at me? Like I'm a project, like I don't belong." Ethan's jaw clenched. "I do, and it makes me sick." But Sarah shook her head slowly. "You can fight for me, Ethan. You can defend me. But I'm the one who has to walk into every room wondering if they see a woman or just a symbol, if they think I earned this seat, or if they assume I was given it because you," her voice broke, "because you're inspired by me." Ethan's eyes flooded with emotion as the elevator doors opened into his penthouse, but the air inside felt colder than ever. He turned to her as the doors shut behind them. "I didn't fall for you because of inspiration, Sarah. I fell because you made me feel human. You're the first person who saw past my name and wanted to know the man behind the facade." "I know that," she said quietly, "but they don't. And sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep proving I deserve to stand beside you." He walked over, gently cupping her face in his hands. "You don't have to prove anything. Not to me, not to anyone." But even as he said it, Sarah saw the storm brewing behind his blue eyes, not doubt in her, but fear that the world wouldn't let them have peace. And she realized the same thing. He was starting to fear too. That love like theirs didn't just fight for each other, it had to fight against everything else too. Racism, classism, expectations, envy. They had crawled out of two very different worlds, and now, with all eyes watching, their connection wasn't just a private bond, it was a battlefield. And though her heart beat for him, though her soul recognized his in every room, the pressure wrapped around her like a noose. She found herself hesitating before entering events, fixing her braids more carefully, questioning every outfit, wondering if her smile was too wide, her presence too bold, her love too obvious. She never wanted to dim her light to fit someone else's comfort, but even fire flickers under cold winds. One night, long after the lights in the city dimmed and silence returned to their shared space, Sarah stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the world she never asked to enter. Ethan came up behind her, wrapped his arms gently around her waist, and pressed his forehead to her shoulder. "I don't want to lose you," he murmured. "You won't," she replied. "But I don't want to lose me either." His arms tightened slightly, and neither of them spoke for a while. The love was still there, undeniable, rich and real, but now it stood in the eye of a storm, and neither of them could pretend it wasn't shaking. They were still them two souls who once found magic in a midnight clinic and healing in shared silence. But now, their story had stepped into a world that didn't care how it began. It only cared how it looked. And Sarah, though strong, began to wonder if love could truly survive in a place where every glance questioned its worth. The silence in the penthouse stretched longer in the days that followed. each word between Ethan and Sarah more careful than the last, like they were both trying to tiptoe across a minefield. Neither of them had built, but were somehow now standing in. The headlines didn't stop them, praised Ethan's new foundation. Others questioned Sarah's role, dissecting her past, her education, her skin, her every move like it was public property. Behind every success was a whisper. Behind every smile was a side-eye, and slowly, the space between them filled with unspoken weight. Ethan spent more time in meetings, his phone never silent, while Sarah buried herself in planning community outreach programs, avoiding the office halls where stares lingered too long. One evening, as the city drowned in storm clouds and thunder cracked like a warning shot, Ethan came home, late, his eyes tired, his collar wrinkled, his energy ragged. Sarah was waiting by the window, her proposal folder open, hope resting on her lap like a fragile glass. "I think we should prioritize the East Side Community Center," she said gently, her voice soft but sure. "It's where most of our underserved applicants are coming from." But Ethan, lost in stress and swimming in boardroom poison, didn't hear her half, he only heard noise. He dropped his briefcase harder than he meant to, running both hands through his hair as he paced. "I just had an investor threaten to pull $5 million if I don't clean up the brand, Sarah," he snapped. "They want the foundation to look polished, professional, not like a personal charity experiment." She blinked, the folder slipping from her hands. "A personal experiment?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that what they think this is?" Ethan didn't answer. His silence said too much. "Is that what you think it is?" she asked again, her chest tightening. He looked at her, jaw clenched, frustration written across his features. Not at her, but at the world pressing in on him from every direction. Still, his next words cracked the very foundation between them. "Maybe they have a point," he muttered. "We're trying to change lives here, and sometimes it just doesn't help that you don't come from the same world they do." The moment the words left his mouth, he froze. Sarah's breath caught like a punch to the chest. Her body stiffened, as if shielding herself from the betrayal that had just slipped past his lips like poison wrapped in exhaustion. "So my background is now a liability?" she said, stunned. Her voice didn't rise, but it trembled. "My struggle disqualifies me?" Ethan's face paled, realization hitting too late. "Sarah, I didn't mean it like that." "But you said it," she interrupted, eyes glassy now, hands trembling as she gathered her things. "After everything, after every night we sat under stars talking about pain, about purpose, you still see me as someone who doesn't belong in your world. You still see their eyes before you see me." "That's not true," he said, stepping toward her, but she backed away. "You let the pressure speak louder than your heart, Ethan, and I can't fight for us if I'm the only one bleeding for it." The tears came quietly as she grabbed her coat, her steps shaking as she moved toward the door. "I believed in us, even when it hurt, even when they whispered. But I won't stay where I'm half seen, not even for love." Ethan reached out, desperate, but stopped himself. Maybe because deep down he knew some wounds weren't healed with apologies. They needed time, space, reflection. The door closed behind her with a finality that left him breathless, alone again, in silence, just like before. Except this time, the emptiness echoed louder, because now he knew what real love tasted like, and he had let the weight of other people's expectations drown it. He sank to the floor, hands in his hair, replaying the moment over and over, the regret already carving into his soul like a fire that wouldn't go out. He didn't sleep that night, or the next. He cancelled meetings, ignored calls, wandered his own penthouse like a ghost, searching for something he once held in his arms. Sarah, meanwhile, sat in her childhood bedroom, head against the wall, heart torn between fury and heartbreak, her phone lighting up with messages she couldn't bear to read. She missed him. God, she missed him. But how do you return to someone who saw the world's judgment and echoed it back at you, even unintentionally? How do you trust again when love cracks under pressure? The wall between them wasn't built overnight, but now it stood tall, cold, and painfully real. And for the first time since that rainy night at the clinic, both Ethan and Sarah felt the full weight of what it meant to love someone who hadn't yet unlearned the world that broke them. The days turned into weeks like pages turned by a wind neither of them could stop. And in that stretch of time where love should have been mending, only silence grew louder. Ethan woke up every morning to empty rooms and heavier regrets, the echo of Sarah's final words etched into the walls of his penthouse like a haunting he couldn't cleanse. He didn't reach out not because he didn't want to, but because every time he picked up the phone, shame strangled his voice. Instead, he drowned himself in the very foundation they once dreamed of together. He expanded outreach programs, visited recovery shelters, sat in on support group sessions, not as a speaker, not as a billionaire, but as a broken man who now understood what loss truly cost. He donated quietly, worked tirelessly, and stood shoulder to shoulder with people who reminded him of Sarah, their resilience, their grace, their stories. Yet no matter how many lives he touched, hers remained the one missing from his world like a breath he couldn't take. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to her night shifts at the clinic, her smile just as soft, her voice just as warm, but something in her eyes had dimmed. The laughter she once shared with co-workers came less often, replaced by quiet moments spent staring out the break room window between patients, lost in memories she hadn't asked for but couldn't erase. She told herself she was fine after all. She had always known how to carry herself, how to endure, but this time was different. This time, she had tasted what it meant to be truly seen, and now every ordinary moment felt like a cruel comparison to what once was. At night, she'd lie in bed, phone beside her, his name still saved in her favorites, untouched. She missed him, not the billionaire, not the press conferences or the privilege. She missed the man who sat beside her under stars and listened like her pain mattered. She missed the look in his eyes when she said something that caught him off guard, the way he whispered her name like it steadied him. But most of all, she missed the version of herself. She became around him bolder, brighter, blooming in ways she never knew she could. Across the city, Ethan would often catch himself reaching for her during meetings when someone said something she would have challenged, or when he saw a quote scribbled in the margin of a report she once marked with a star. He tried writing her letters, dozens of them, but they all ended the same way. Unfinished, smudged with hesitation, sealed in drawers he never opened again. At events, reporters asked about her subtly, probing with veiled questions. He'd deflect with polite professionalism, but inside, every inquiry reopened the wound. Friends advised him to move on. Advisors told him to stay focused, but no amount of success filled the hollow where her voice once lived. Sarah, too, tried to move forward, accepting a local speaking invitation, mentoring younger staff, smiling through family dinners where no one knew how to ask about the shadow in her chest. But sometimes, mid-conversation, she'd drift away, mind tugged back to moments only her heart remembered. The brush of his fingers against hers when words failed, the raw way he once said, "You make me feel like I'm worth saving." That memory lived in her like a song on repeat, soft but unrelenting. They both moved in their own worlds, orbiting the memory of each other like two planets too afraid to collide again. And the silence between them, unspoken apologies, unexpressed ache became a language of its own. Neither one knew how to close the gap. Neither knew if they should. But every heartbeat, every pause, every breath they took alone screamed the same quiet truth. Love hadn't ended. It had only gone quiet, waiting to be brave again. It was a quiet Thursday evening when the letter arrived, tucked between clinic mail and hospital newsletters, its envelope hand-addressed in dark Inca name, written with deliberate curves, as if each letter had been weighed before it was set down. Sarah's heart skipped when she saw it, fingers pausing mid-sort, breath caught in her throat. She knew that handwriting. Her hands trembled as she carried it to the staff lounge, sitting slowly on the worn vinyl couch, as if her body already knew this moment would change something. She didn't open it right away. She stared at it for minutes that stretched like hours, letting the silence around her fold in before carefully peeling the flap open, unfolding the page that smelled faintly of cedar and something clean. Then she read, and with every line, her chest tightened. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an apology dressed in ego. It was Ethan raw, unfiltered, vulnerable in a way he'd never been before. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter began, "and I'm not writing to win you back. I'm writing because silence is the only thing louder than the words I should have said when you walked away." Her eyes blurred, and she blinked quickly, inhaling slowly, as the words dug deeper. "I lashed out that night because I was scared not of you, but of what you made me feel. You held up a mirror, and I saw a man who wasn't enough. Not for the foundation, not for you, not even for the vision I claimed to believe in. I've spent so long being praised for things I didn't earn, and hiding behind things I never felt. Then you came along, and for the first time, I wanted to be better, not for press, not for profit, but for love. I sabotaged that because fear made a home in me long before you ever touched my world." She could almost hear his voice now, low and hoarse with emotion, each line unfolding a piece of the man she knew, still lived beneath the layers of legacy and pain. "You once told me people don't need saving, they need to be believed in. I didn't believe in myself enough to let you stay. I let the world's noise drown out your truth. And you left not because you stopped loving me, but because I stopped choosing you above that noise. That will forever be my mistake to live with." Sarah covered her mouth, the paper crinkling in her hand as her throat tightened. He hadn't once asked her to come back. He hadn't begged. He'd simply confessed. "I want you to know I've kept building the foundation. Not in your image, but with your voice. I go back to your old notes, your sketches, your words, and they still guide every move. I've been meeting the people you told me to listen to. I sit in rooms I once dominated, and now just observe. I am learning how to shut up and let people feel safe again. All because of what you taught me. Even in silence, you are shaping something good." She paused, wiping a tear before continuing, her eyes tracing the final lines. "I'm not asking for your love, Sarah. I'm just asking for the chance to prove that your love changed me. That even if you never walk through my door again, I will carry you in every decision I make that matters. Because you weren't a moment in my life. You were the turning point. If there's a bridge left between us, even if it's thin and frayed, I'll wait on the other side quietly, patiently, gratefully. Yours, always, Ethan." She exhaled like she hadn't breathed in days, the letter now trembling in her lap, the weight of his honesty sinking into her like rain on thirsty earth. She sat there for a long while, heart pounding, not with clarity, but with the ache of knowing something had shifted again. Not in the world, but in her. Because for the first time since that night, she didn't feel bitter. She felt seen, not through apologies or gestures, but through truth. And as the clinic buzzed back to life outside the lounge, she folded the letter carefully, holding it to her chest like something sacred. She didn't know what came next, but she knew this. Love hadn't died. It had only grown quiet, like seeds buried deep, waiting for light to rise again. The rain returned like a memory that hadn't quite finished its story, tapping gently against the clinic's windows, just as it had that very first night. The streets outside glossed with reflections and possibility. Sarah sat alone at the front desk, flipping slowly through patient files, her thoughts dancing somewhere between reality and the weight of the letter she'd read days ago, its words still alive in her chest, still echoing between heartbeats. She hadn't replied. Not yet. She wasn't sure if she needed to. But something inside her told her the story wasn't finished, that some moments demand to be rewritten not with words, but with presence. Then, just after midnight, the door creaked open with a softness that stole her breath. She didn't look up immediately. She thought it might be another late-night walk-in, but her heart betrayed her, racing ahead of logic, whispering a name she hadn't spoken aloud in weeks. And when she finally lifted her eyes, he was there. Ethan, soaked in rain, but standing tall. Not as the billionaire the world adored, not as the man who had once wounded her with fear, but as the one who had changed. The one who had bled silently for her in letters, who had waited on the other side of that fragile bridge he'd promised to rebuild. Their eyes locked, no guards, no walls, just soul to Suland, The whole clinic seemed to inhale with her, the room frozen in stillness, as if time itself was holding its breath. Without a word, Ethan stepped forward, water dripping from his coat, his hair clinging to his forehead, and knelt. Not with fanfare, not with a diamond meant to dazzle the world, but with a simple ring of dark silver, hand engraved with a single word. "Hi," Sarah gasped, her hand covering her mouth as tears welled instantly, not from shock, but from recognition. That one word had been the beginning of everything, the greeting that changed his life, the kindness that opened his cage, the moment she first saw him not as a headline, not as a legacy, but as a man. He held the ring gently, not pushing it toward her, but offering it like a prayer. "You saved me," he said softly, voice cracking with the storm still clinging to his coat. "Not with answers, not with promises, just with your presence. You showed me how to breathe again, and I never deserved it. But if there's any part of you that still believes in who we were, who we are, then let me walk beside you. Not ahead of you, not above you, just beside you. Always." Her tears fell freely now, but they weren't from pain. They were from the overwhelming release of a love that had waited so patiently, so faithfully, in the silent spaces between their heartbreak. She stepped toward him, slowly, every part of her trembling not from doubt, but from the weight of coming home. She didn't look at the ring. She looked at him, the man who had listened, grown, changed. She knelt down to him, on that cold tile floor between the clinic walls, where their story had been written in whispers and wounds. "Hi," she whispered, through her tears, through her smile. That was her answer. That was her yes. And as he slipped the ring onto her finger, simple, imperfect, perfect, the storm outside softened, as if the sky itself had been holding back until this moment. They stood together, forehead to forehead, both soaked, both shaking, both unafraid now of what came next. In the stillness of that quiet midnight, the clinic became more than a place of healing. It became the altar of two hearts that refused to give up. The staff peeked silently from behind doors, smiling through tears of their own. No music played, no cameras flashed, but it was the most honest proposal the universe had ever witnessed. A love born in silence, forged in pain, healed in time, and now, finally, spoken without fear. They left the clinic hand in hand, not needing a destination, because the truth was, they had always been walking toward each other. The ring on her finger wasn't just a symbol of love, it was a reminder that sometimes a simple hi is all it takes to change everything. And this time, no walls stood between them, only the wide, open sky,